Okay, I'm going to carry on with the demo that I started at my class today of how to draw a rose in pastel. I'm using Unison Colour, the grey set and my own Denise Findlay set together to achieve the colours that you see. So I've started by already blocking in a lot of the undertones and some of the highlights as well. So what I'd like to do is to go in with a little bit of Conte to define some of the darker areas and shapes round about the petals. Conte is just a harder form of pastel, which I use sometimes like a charcoal pencil really, so you could also use a charcoal pencil if you don't have Conte. I'm just going to put a little bit of definition for this petal. Usually when I'm painting roses, I would draw them in first to create an under guideline to what I paint on top. But with this one I have treated it slightly differently, partially because it's a demonstration and I wanted to do it fairly quickly. So I've probably spent about 15 minutes only on this at the moment, which isn't very long. It's very important that you don't just imagine which fold could be there, that you're actually exact with where you put things, because it creates a lot of a muddle later for you to sort out. So I'm using a dark grey, which is actually in my set as well as the grey set, and it's lovely for the shadow areas. At this stage it's helpful to bring in some darks. I've got mainly highlights and mid-tones and obviously the dark background, but it's integral to show the form by including the three tones. I'm just going to look close at my image. I'll post the image beside this so you can see what I've been working from at a later date. Pick out some of the lights. Now the shadows have quite a lot of purples and blues, but where you put purples and blues you need to balance your colour, because in actual fact there's a lot of neutrals as well in a rose. So I'm using as well some lovely yellowy greys, just to balance this purple and this blue, because yellow is the complementary colour of purple, which some of you may know. So I just introduced this. I'm slightly imaginative. I do see these colours, but at the moment they look quite strong when you put them down. But you're going to mix them anyway, so with pastel you do your mixing on the paper rather than on the palette with paint. I'm using an iPad at the moment to work from, mainly because I can't print anything off. I tend to like to print off a picture that I can hold, but obviously at the moment that's harder to do because I can't get out and about due to the restrictions that are in place. We've got a wonderful device that we can work from our phones. We can work from life if you're fortunate enough to have roses at the moment. I started this for my art class this morning through a Zoom call. I suspect the quality might be slightly higher through taking a video with my phone, but we'll compare it later. Just blending all these colours together using a blending stick. If you don't have one of these, you can use other things like a cotton bud or something like that. That's obviously, it'll probably smudge it too much. You need to be very careful. These are designed for actually blending pastel together without erasing it. You can also use your fingers if you don't have anything. You could do this with using only white and black and just mix your colours together. Just having a wee stand back. So you don't have to have grey pastels. Some people do have them. You can order things online at the moment. You can order all sorts from art suppliers and even Amazon. So if you don't have things, you can get hold of things currently. I'm just blending everything to take the hard edges away as well. I don't want hard edges yet. So where they become established, I tend to blur them out using a blending stick. You can, of course, use pastel pencils, which are helpful. I'm just going to focus on this little petal once again. You can see I apply it quite thickly, and then I'll do the blending later. If you're using good quality pastels like Unison, they're so full of pigment that you can apply a lot of pastel before the paper will jar. Whereas if you're using cheaper ones, you won't be able to apply as much, so just be aware of that. Right, so I'm just double checking something here. I've got an extra fold here. No, I haven't actually, that's right what I've done. I'm just going to bring out that fold. If you're not using pastel, the same idea would apply for painting. Start with your mid-tones and then add in your highlights and then your darker tones. With oil painting and acrylic, I would recommend drawing in, and also, of course, watercolour. Because of the complexity of folds, I would draw it in first. The lighting is everything in a portrait, no matter if it's a person or a flower. So pick images or subjects that have good natural lighting, preferably one source of light. And then you have lots to play around with. The more you look at an image, the more you will actually see, which is great because then you can work harder on it and work into it more. Let me just put my darkest grey in. This is, I'm trying to see the number of it, grey 14, which is in the grey set and also in my own set. Take a wee step back and look at what you've done. Fairly happy with how that's coming on, but I need to stand back to make some decisions about what area to focus on next. I like the overall coloration of the blue, the purple with the yellows and the peaches because they balance really well, but I will need to bring some of the yellow somehow into the blues to make it less blue so that it looks like a white rose. I'm not quite sure how I'll do that yet, but I could use a harder pastel or I could use my soft pastels. I can even put a little bit of white through things with the hard Conte, which just dulls it a wee bit. You can see there's not as much pigment in that, and it actually does dull it. It lightens it, but it's a kind of dead light, whereas if I use pastel, it's far more vibrant than that. You can see how thick that pastel is because it just falls off, which is good, but it leaves a residue. What I'm likely to do as well is use coloured pencils, and I'll show you that later and what you can do with coloured pencils, which is slightly unusual for pastel. but it's also quite effective in producing subtle changes. You want the technique of the blending through with the stick to carry on throughout the portrait, and then gradually you'll tighten up. Right, so I need a wee bit more in here to vary it. See what colours might work for that. That's a wee bit light. There's actually a very nice purple here. It's a grey as well, but it's purple, so it's a wee bit old, this one. But let's just see what happens if I put some lovely purple right up to the neck, the fold of that. Oops, that was a wee bit broken. Right up to the underside of this petal where it curls over into the light. Now, introducing a purple will balance beautifully with this yellow I've put, so don't be afraid to use colour, even if it's a neutral sort of colour of rose or flower that you're doing. Using a pure purple like that will make it more vibrant and more interesting, and I can neutralise it later. What you can also do is put yellow, a mustardy yellow. This is the dark. There's two grey sets. This is the secondary grey set, which is 19 upwards. The other set is 1 to 18. You see, if I put the yellowy mustard over these purpley tones, it mixes really well because they're complementary. So you wouldn't maybe expect me to put that colour in it, but I know in my head knowledge that it will work because of my opposite colours knowledge. All my mixing has to take place on the paper. Nothing can happen on a palette or out with that. So that's why a pastel is really quite freeing to work with, because you can apply things straight onto it. I've never actually drawn a rose in pastel before. I've recently started to work on roses in oils. So this is new territory for me. So I'm working out my colours as I go, which is actually quite fun. But it means that every time you do that, you're learning something new, so it just takes that wee bit longer than it would if I'd done this before. This is a slightly mid-tony grey. Just to lift here, there's a nice bit the way it curves round. It's helpful to focus on one bit at a certain stage, but I don't feel I'm really at that yet. I'm still trying to balance colours and bring a sense of realism into the subject before I go too far into one area. I suppose this is when the painting or drawing becomes its own personality. And it almost dictates to you how it will look and how it will become. So I'm just blending that through. I'm using a grey paper, a Fabriano paper, but if you don't have grey, you can certainly use white. You'll need to dirty your paper with some willow charcoal first. And the reason we use willow charcoal is that the pastel is too heavy to use to begin with. You want enough that you can move it around, and you want it to be slightly thin, so it's not too heavy a dark underneath. Just picking out that one there. It's all about relationships, how one colour goes next to another, one tone goes next to another. And also the way I'm using this is quite helpful with the contour, not to be too obvious, not to just go round, but to actually scrub it through in different ways and then go with the contour. I need a white, I think, for that. I'm just picking out a lighter colour that's a cooler kind of white on this. Now, petals are like folds really, so they have a a highlight, they have a mid-tone, and they have shadows obviously, but they also have a reflected highlight. So up here, I think I've lost it a wee bit for you to see it, but you have the lighter point, which is here. And that goes into the shadow here where it curves round. Obviously a lot of blending's needed there, it's not finished, but and that goes into this area here, which is a reflected highlight, which is actually reflected from that part of the rose. Sometimes what helps is to use a yellowy colour for the reflected highlight rather than white in pastel, something like that. Or I've actually used a pale purple as well, which is one out of my set. It's a portrait colour, but it could look really lovely as well if you put it on top. Back to blending this one. So don't get lazy and stop looking at your image. It's very important that you keep looking at your image at this stage, or you'll just make up things and then you'll wonder why it's not working, and it's just because you've not looked at it properly. It's all about observation. And then sometimes you'll apply a colour to one bit and think, oh, that actually works really well, and you'll put it in other bits while it's still in your head, because you'll forget what you did 10 minutes time if you don't do it now. So I'll just roughly put it in so that I can make use of that. It's a great thing to do to absorb your mind at the moment, something like this, because it doesn't allow you time to think of anything else. So you can't get distracted about reading the news or looking at social media. You just end up getting absorbed in your art. It's not really just for artists, it's for everyone. You don't need to be doing this for a living or extremely talented to be able to draw. Anybody can draw. The passion that you get is maybe not something you can teach, but usually what happens when I teach people how to draw is they get a passion for it and they keep doing it, and they're surprised at what they can achieve. Blocking in is a great way to achieve a likeness or a reality without being fantastic at drawing. It gives you building blocks that you can build on and correct bit by bit, gradually, rather than having to work it all out before you start. This wee petal comes over here a bit and it curves round, but I'll need to get curving it later. Just another wee stand back. Right, it's starting to look a bit better. I think also what might help is to go back to my original dark pastel. Actually, this is charcoal, it's not pastel. And just maybe sharpen up some of this, because it will contrast with the petals, which will make them come out. Now I need to adjust that one, so I'm not going to go too far in with it. So this is just a very heavy charcoal made by Creta Colour. It's a really good make of charcoal. You can also use the pastel with this as well, but the dark grey one, a very dark grey, or the carbon, or even a black one if you don't have these. But the more dark you add, the more contrast you get and the more reality you hopefully will achieve. I'm just using my hand. Now my paper's quite coarse, so in the case of this paper, it's sometimes helpful to use this part of your hand just to embed it into the page. Press it in, and then you can use your blending stick over it, which really pushes it into the page, and it shapes it better as well. bit rough with the blending stick. Move that round here. I'm not putting it everywhere, I'm having it in bits, because if you have it everywhere, it'll just turn into a big black mass too soon. I'd rather be cleverer than that with it. Back to this lovely grey, just to expand this wee part of this petal. You can see that these pastels are so good, they just go straight on top of that heavy black and there's no problem. It doesn't show through. Again, that's to do with the wonderful pigment. I've taught people who usually don't like pastel that have used these pastels, the Unison pastels, and they become completely converted to using pastel and become pastel artists, which is says a lot about the quality of them. But these are beautifully handmade pastels, and although they're not the cheapest in the market, they are definitely, in my opinion, the best. And I've used them since I was a student. Being a wee bit carefuler on certain bits. Stand back.